Bring me this bottle, if you can even read it.
I know it well. I own this place now.
Before we begin, I have a small request for you. I'm currently striving to hit the 1000 subscriber mark, a number that holds a very special significance for me. Please hit that subscribe button. It's a simple click, but it's a massive source of motivation for me to create the next video. I thank you from the bottom of my heart. Sebastián Villareal raised his wineglass and, with a sneer, switched to French without warning. His words sliced through the air of the elegant restaurant like a razor. Écoutez-moi bien, ma petite chérie, et dis au chef mes exigences, he purred. The humiliation precisely calculated to be public, cruel, and perfect. What this arrogant millionaire didn't know was that Elena Morales, the waitress polishing glasses with trembling hands, harbored a secret that was about to shatter his inflated ego. Elena felt the familiar knot in her stomach tighten as she approached the main table at Levernarden, Mexico City's most exclusive establishment. It was Friday night, the time when Chilango high society unfurled their feathers like peacocks, flaunting their gold watches and boasting about million-dollar investments. To them, Elena was invisible, a mere figure in a black uniform refilling glasses and clearing plates. Where are you watching this story from? Leave us your answer in the comments. Elena had been working at Levernarden for 3 years. Ever since the economic crisis had obliterated her former life, no one at the restaurant knew that just 5 years prior, she had been a tenured professor of Romance languages at the National Autonomous University of Mexico. No one knew she spoke 6 languages fluently, that she had studied at the Sorbonne on an academic excellence scholarship, that her thesis on the evolution of medieval French had been published in specialized European journals. Mesera. Sebastián's voice cut through her thoughts. Elena approached with the water tray, keeping her gaze lowered as she'd been taught. Could you bring us the wine list? And make it quick? We're in a hurry. Of course, sir, Elena replied softly. She had learned to be invisible, to give no cause for complaint or conflict. Every tip was essential for paying the rent on her tiny room in Colonia Doctores. Victoria, look at this, Sebastián murmured with a cruel smile, as Elena returned with the wine list. I bet these people don't even know what they're serving. Let's have a little fun. Elena sensed the danger before Sebastián even opened his mouth. She had developed a sixth sense for detecting problematic clients, those who found pleasure in humiliating service staff. The malicious glint in Sebastián's eyes was unmistakable. Excuse me, mademoiselle, Sebastián began, raising his voice just enough for nearby tables to hear. I have a query about the menu, but I prefer to express myself in a more refined language. Without warning, he switched to French, but it wasn't the basic French some Mexican businessmen had picked up in executive courses. It was an elaborate French, rife with subjunctives and archaic expressions he had memorized specifically to intimidate. Écoutez-moi bien, ma petite servante. Je désire que vous transmettiez au chef mes exigences particulières concernant le foie gras. Il faut qu'il soit préparé selon la méthode traditionnelle française, pas selon vos approximations mexicaines. Comprenez-vous ce que je veux dire? Ou bien dois-je parler plus lentement pour votre petit cerveau? Translation: Listen to me carefully, my little servant. I want you to convey to the chef my specific requirements regarding the foie gras. It must be prepared according to the traditional French method, not according to your Mexican approximations. Do you understand what I mean? Or must I speak slower for your little brain? The restaurant plunged into an awkward silence. Diners at neighboring tables turned their heads, some smiling with complicity at the spectacle, others feigning not to hear out of secondhand embarrassment. The service staff paused in their duties, expectant. Elena felt the familiar sting of humiliation rising in her throat. Sebastián's French was pretentious, but correct, designed to degrade her publicly. Everyone waited to see the humble waitress stammering apologies, confessing she didn't understand, begging him to speak in Spanish. Sebastián, I don't think it's necessary, Victoria murmured uncomfortably. SH. He silenced her with a dismissive gesture. I'm teaching her something about the real world. Sebastián leaned back in his chair, crossed his arms, and waited for his moment of glory. The waitress breaking down before his intellectual and economic superiority. In his mind, this was educational. He was showing her her place in the social hierarchy. Elena looked at her shoes for a second, took a deep breath, and made a decision that would change everything. If you want to know how this waitress destroyed a millionaire's ego using his own weapon against him, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. This story is just beginning. Elena slowly looked up. In her eyes, Sebastián thought he detected for a fleeting moment something he didn't expect. Not confusion or fear, but a dangerous calm. But the moment passed so quickly he thought he'd imagined it. "She's not going to answer, is she?" Sebastian asked, his arrogance growing. "Or does she need me to call someone who actually knows languages?" "Leave her alone," Victoria muttered, increasingly embarrassed by the scene. "No, no," Sebastian insisted, now addressing the entire restaurant. "This is important. We live in a globalized world. Staff at a restaurant of this caliber should have at least basic notions of French, don't you think?" Several diners nodded, some even applauding discreetly. This was the kind of audience that enjoyed seeing the rich put the workers in their place. The applause was brief, almost timid, but enough. A small gesture carrying a huge message, approval, not of the words, but of the act of humiliation. Elena felt that sound pierce her chest more forcefully than any insult. Because it was no longer just about Sebastian. Now the entire restaurant was participating, even if in silence. There were those who relished the spectacle, people who, shielded by their status, found entertainment in watching someone reduced to their most basic function. Serve, be silent, accept. Others watched with a frown, but said nothing. And that silence weighed almost as much as open mockery. It was confirmation that intervening came at a price no one was willing to pay. Victoria lowered her gaze for a second. Her discomfort was evident, but insufficient. It wasn't enough to feel bad. It wasn't enough not to laugh. The humiliation continued its unchecked advance. Sebastian, on the other hand, grew with every second. His posture relaxed. His voice grew more confident. He had found the exact point where power is exercised without consequences. Elena listened to him speak French, but she no longer translated the words. It wasn't necessary. The message was universal. You don't belong here. This world isn't yours. Something inside her tightened. It wasn't immediate rage. It was something colder, more precise, an uncomfortable clarity that admitted no turning back. Elena remained still, her hands clasped in front of her apron. Her silence began to irritate Sebastian, who was expecting a more dramatic reaction. "Very well," he continued in French, this time with more venom. "Puisque vous ne comprenez rien, permettez-moi de vous expliquer votre situation. Vous êtes une simple serveuse dans un monde qui appartient aux gens comme moi. Votre travail consiste à sourire, à obéir et à disparaître. C'est la réalité de votre classe sociale." Translation: Since you understand nothing, allow me to explain your situation. You are a mere waitress in a world that belongs to people like me. Your job is to smile, obey, and disappear. That is the reality of your social class. The insult was so direct, so cruel, that even some of the diners who had enjoyed the spectacle began to feel uncomfortable. An elderly woman at a corner table shook her head in disgust. Elena closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, something had changed. The set of her shoulders, the tilt of her head, even her breathing. It was as if she had shed a mask she had worn for 3 years. "Are you all right, miss?" asked a young waiter named Carlos, approaching to see if she needed support. Elena gave him a reassuring wave and turned back to Sebastian. Her voice, when she finally spoke, had a different timbre, deeper, more assured. "Mr. Villareal, I understand perfectly what you are telling me. I also understand that you are using French not because you truly master the language, but because you assume I do not." Sebastian blinked, surprised that she had responded in Spanish with such composure. "Well, at least you admit you don't understand." "I have admitted nothing," Elena interrupted. "In fact, I believe there is a fundamental misunderstanding here." The temperature of the restaurant seemed to drop several degrees. Elena was no longer the timid, servile waitress of 5 minutes ago. There was a natural authority about her, beginning to manifest as if it had been held back all this time. "Where are you watching me from?" "I'd love to know your thoughts in the comments." Sebastian felt a strange unease, like when animals sense an earthquake. "What misunderstanding?" he asked. "I asked you a simple question in French, and you couldn't answer." "You can answer," Elena said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I was simply deciding if it was worth it." Victoria, who had been watching the exchange with growing fascination, leaned forward in her chair. Something extraordinary was about to happen. She could feel it. The restaurant manager, François Dubois, a genuine Frenchman from Lyon who had arrived in Mexico 20 years ago, appeared discreetly near the table. He had been observing the situation from the bar and sensed his employee was about to surprise everyone. "Is there a problem here?" François asked with his authentic Parisian accent. "No problem," Elena replied without taking her eyes off Sebastian. Mr. Villareal was simply wanting to practice his French with me. Sebastián frowned. There was something in Elena's tone, an inexplicable confidence, that made him nervous. I wasn't practicing anything. I was making a request that this employee couldn't understand. Oh, I understood perfectly, Elena retorted. I understood every word, every nuance, every intention behind your exigencias particulares. The question is, are you sure you want me to respond in the same language you chose? The silence spread like an oil slick across the restaurant. The diners had stopped pretending they weren't paying attention. Even the waiters had paused to observe. Sebastián shifted in his seat. Something was terribly wrong with this situation, but he couldn't pinpoint what. Of course, I'm sure. Respond however you can. Elena nodded slowly. As you wish. Elena stood up straight. When she began to speak, her voice filled the restaurant with an authority that made even the waiters stop their duties to listen. Monsieur Villareal, she began, and her French accent was so perfect, so naturally Parisian, that François Dubois raised his eyebrows in surprise. Je crains qu'il y ait une erreur fondamentale dans votre approche ce soir. Her French was not the memorized French of executive courses. It was the fluid, elegant, and sophisticated French of someone who had lived the language, dreamed in it, mastered it, like a musician masters their instrument. Permettez-moi de corriger vos erreurs linguistiques avant de répondre à votre commande. Elena continued with an icy smile. Premièrement, l'expression mes exigences particulières que vous avez utilisée suggère une familiarité avec le personnel qui frise l'impolitesse. Un gentleman dirait plutôt mes préférences ou mes sujets. Translation. Allow me to correct your linguistic errors before responding to your order. First, the expression my particular requirements that you used suggests a familiarity with the staff that borders on rudeness. A gentleman would rather say my preferences or my wishes. A gentleman would say my preferences or my desires. Blood drained from Sebastián's face. Elena not only spoke French, she spoke it better than he did, with a precision that made his own earlier words sound clumsy and vulgar by comparison. But Elena wasn't finished. Her voice grew colder, sharper. Secondly, she continued relentlessly, your use of the imperfect subjunctive in the phrase il faut qu'il soit préparé demonstrates a superficial understanding of French grammar. The correct construction would be il convient que ce soit préparé if you truly wish to impress. Translation. Secondly, your use of the imperfect subjunctive in the phrase he must be prepared. It demonstrates a superficial understanding of French grammar. The correct construction would be it is fitting that he be prepared if you truly wanted to impress. Victoria brought a hand to her mouth, trying to hide a smile of astonishment. The man who had tried to humiliate a waitress was being academically demolished by that very same waitress. François Dubois moved closer, his eyes shining with professional recognition. This level of French wasn't learned in courses. This woman had studied the language seriously, perhaps in France itself. Elena paused, allowing her corrections to settle like knives into Sebastián's ego. Then she switched to Spanish with a perfectly neutral accent. But most importantly, Mr. Villareal, is your third sentence? Comprenez-vous ce que je veux dire, ou bien dois-je parler plus lentement pour votre petit cerveau? That pretense of an educated client is the insult of a man who confuses money with class. The restaurant fell into absolute silence. Even the sounds from the kitchen seemed to have stopped. Elena now continued, returning to French with a fluency that made it clear switching languages was as natural to her as breathing. Concernant votre commande de foie gras, nous ne servons pas de foie gras dans cet établissement depuis 3 ans, conformément à nos principes éthiques. Si vous aviez pris la peine de lire attentivement notre carte, vous l'auriez remarqué. Translation. Now, regarding your order of foie gras, we do not serve foie gras in this establishment for 3 years, in accordance with our ethical principles. If you had taken the trouble to carefully read our menu, you would have noticed it. Sebastián opened and closed his mouth like a fish out of water. His strategy to humiliate her had been utterly destroyed. Worse, he had been exposed as a man who didn't master the language he had used to attack her and who didn't even know the menu of the restaurant where he was dining. I, he stammered. His confidence completely evaporated. Elena wasn't finished. Her voice took on a professorial tone as if she were giving a lecture. If you will permit me one final observation, monsieur, True refinement is not about humiliating those you consider beneath you using a foreign language. It is about treating all people with dignity, regardless of their social or economic standing. She switched back to Spanish, looking directly into Sebastian's eyes. I have been serving tables in this restaurant for 3 years, not for lack of education, but out of economic necessity. I hold a doctorate in Romance languages from UNAM. I studied at the Sorbonne on a scholarship of excellence and speak 6 languages fluently. But more important than all of that, I possess something that all your money cannot buy. What is that? Victoria murmured, completely mesmerized by Elena's transformation. Elena smiled with genuine sadness, dignity. If you want to know how this story of poetic justice ends, don't forget to like this video. The silence that followed was deafening. Sebastián Villareal, the man who had entered the restaurant like a conqueror, was utterly defeated. His face had gone from the red of rage to the white of absolute humiliation. He had no words, no defense, no escape. Victoria slowly rose from her chair. She looked at Sebastián with a mixture of disgust and disappointment that cut deeper than any verbal reproach. "I believe our date is over," she said firmly. She turned to Elena with genuine respect. "Miss, I am profoundly sorry for how this man treated you. Your response was extraordinary." Victoria picked up her purse and walked towards the exit. At the door, she paused and, without turning, added, "Sebastián, let someone else pay the bill. I have nothing more to do here." The door closed behind her with a definitive click. François Dubois approached Elena, his eyes shining with pride and astonishment. "Elena," he said softly, "why did you never tell me you had that academic background?" Elena lowered her gaze, momentarily returning to her role of humble waitress. "Because I needed the job, François, and I feared that if they knew I was overqualified, they wouldn't hire me or would look for excuses to fire me." "On the contrary," François replied with a wide smile. "Tomorrow morning, I want to talk with you. I have a proposal to make." Sebastián remained seated at his table, completely immobile. The other diners watched him with a mix of curiosity and disdain. The man who had sought to publicly humiliate a worker had been devastated by that same woman using his own arrogance against him. One of the diners, an older man with graying hair, rose and approached Elena. "Miss," he said respectfully, "I have just witnessed something remarkable. I am the rector of Universidad Iberoamericana. Might we have a conversation?" Elena looked at him in surprise. "Dr. Ramirez," she whispered, recognizing the academic who had been her idol years ago. "I was wondering what had become of the brilliant Elena Morales, who disappeared from academic circles 3 years ago. Now I understand why." The next 2 hours were a whirlwind. Elena received 3 job offers, one as a language coordinator at François' restaurant, another as a part-time professor at Iberoamericana, and a third from a translation company that had been looking for someone with her exact profile. Sebastián finally rose from his table, left enough money to cover his entire meal without waiting for change, and headed for the exit. As he passed Elena, he stopped. "I didn't know," he murmured, without meeting her eyes. "That is precisely the problem," Elena replied, her voice soft but firm. "You never bothered to know." Sebastián nodded almost imperceptibly and exited the restaurant. His Porsche waited at the valet parking, but for the first time in years, all his material wealth felt empty. He had learned a lesson no business school teaches, that true superiority is not bought with money, nor demonstrated by humiliating others. 3 months later, Elena had left her job as a waitress. She was combining her classes at the university with her new position as International Communication Director at François' Restaurant Group. Her life wasn't perfect, but for the first time in years, she felt like she was being herself again. As for Sebastián, videos of his public humiliation went viral on social media. His real estate company lost several important clients when his history of displacing low-income families came to light. He learned too late that in the age of social media, moments of cruelty can haunt you forever. This is the story of how a waitress with a doctorate proved that knowledge is the greatest power that exists, and that true class is not measured by what you have in the bank, but by how you treat those you believe are beneath you. The next time you see someone in a service job, remember Elena's story. You never know what kind of wisdom, experience, or talent might be hidden behind a uniform. Respect costs nothing, but its absence can cost you everything. Thank you for joining us on this story. If you were moved to see poetic justice served in perfect French, subscribe to the channel for more stories of extraordinary people facing difficult circumstances. And remember, we all have a story to tell. We just need the right moment to reveal it.